The ballroom went quiet so fast that the music seemed to fold in on itself and die. 300 guests in silk and diamonds turned at the same time, drawn by the sharp voice that cut across the marble floor like a slap. Crystal glasses paused halfway to painted lips. A waiter froze with a tray balanced on his fingertips. Even the great chandeliers above seemed to hold their light a little tighter, as if the room itself was holding its breath. In the center of all that wealth stood a small girl in a coral dress. She was 7 years old. Her hair was braided with care, each part straight and neat, tiny beads at the ends that her mother had set in place that morning with shaking, hopeful hands. The dress was simple. The fabric was thin. Anyone with money could see in one glance that it had been sewn at a kitchen table and not bought in any store. But the girl had loved it. She had spun in it that afternoon and laughed and called herself a princess. Now she stood very still, because the most beautiful woman in the room was pointing at her and laughing. "Look at her," Vanessa Crane said, loud enough for every guest to hear. She wore a gown of deep red, and her smile was bright and cold. "Look at her cheap little clothes. Did someone let the help bring a child to my engagement party? Did they think no one would notice?" A few people laughed, the nervous laugh of those who do not want to be next. The girl's lip trembled. She did not fully understand the words, because she could not hear well from her right ear, but she understood the laughter. Laughter you do not understand, aimed at you, is a thing a child feels in the chest like cold water. Near the wall, a woman in an emerald green dress went pale. Imani Carter had spent 2 days' pay to look like she belonged in this room for one night, only so her daughter could see the lights. Now she was moving forward, her heart slamming, ready to take the blow herself, ready to gather her child and run from all this gold and shame. But before she could reach her daughter, a shadow crossed the floor. A tall man in a navy suit stepped out of the crowd. The room knew him. The room feared him. People in the city said his name in low voices and called him a boss, a man whose family had once ruled the streets, a man you did not cross. Vanessa's smile widened when she saw him, because she thought he was coming to stand at her side. He was not. He walked past her as if she were not there, knelt down in front of the small girl in the coral dress, and looked her gently in the eyes. And then the man they called the most dangerous in Chicago did something that made 300 people forget how to breathe. "We will get there. I promise you we will. But first you have to know how a maid's daughter and a feared man ended up in the same room, and why what happened next changed every life inside it. Before we go on, I have to ask you something, and I want you to be honest. If you had been in that ballroom, in that silence, watching a grown woman laugh at a little girl who could not even fight back, would you have stayed quiet like everyone else, or would you have been the one to step forward? Tell me the truth in the comments. And if you believe a child should never be made to feel small for being poor, take 1 second right now to subscribe, because the people who do are the people this story is for. Now let me take you back to the beginning. It started 6 weeks before that gala, in a house on a hill, on a cold gray morning. The alarm went off at 4:30 in the morning, and Imani Carter turned it off before the first sound finished, because the walls of the apartment were thin and her daughter needed sleep. She lay still for a moment in the dark and did the math she did every morning. Rent was due in 9 days. The electric bill was past due by 4. The school had sent a note about a field trip that cost $12, and she had not yet figured out where the $12 would come from. Then she put the math away, the way you put away a heavy bag you have to carry but do not have to look at, and she got up. In the next room her daughter Zuri slept with one arm thrown over a stuffed rabbit that had lost most of its stuffing years ago. Imani stood in the doorway for a moment, the way mothers do, just to watch the small chest rise and fall. Zuri was the reason for everything. The early mornings, the aching feet, the rides on 3 different buses across the city. All of it was for the girl with the rabbit. Imani worked as a housekeeper at the Moretti estate, the grandest house she had ever set foot in. She had taken the job 8 months earlier, and it paid better than anything before it, which was the only reason she could keep the lights on at all. The man who owned the house, Luca Moretti, she had seen only a handful of times. He kept to himself. The staff spoke of him the way you speak of weather, with care and a little fear. The one who truly ran the household now was the woman the staff called the future Mrs. Moretti. Vanessa Crane had moved into the estate 3 months before, and the house had changed under her like a garden under frost. She made new rules every week. The staff were not to speak unless spoken to. They were not to use the front stairs. They were not to be seen in the main rooms after 8 in the morning. She returned dishes to the kitchen if a single water spot dried on them, and she kept a list of every mistake in a small leather book that she liked to tap with one long fingernail. Imani had learned to be invisible. It was a skill she had perfected over years of cleaning other people's lives. You moved like water. You finished your work. You did not give anyone a reason to remember your face. That morning, after 2 buses and a long walk up the hill in the cold, she let herself in through the service door and began her day. She polished the long banister. She set fresh flowers in the front hall. She wiped down the tall windows until the gray morning light came through them clean. It was Theo Banks who found her at the windows. Theo had managed the estate for almost 30 years, since long before Luca was a grown man. He was a tall African-American gentleman with silver in his hair and a slow, kind way of moving, and he was the closest thing the staff had to a grandfather. "You look tired this morning," he said, setting down a tray of cleaning cloths. "I am always tired," Imani said, and she smiled to take the weight out of it. "But I am here. That is what counts." Theo studied her for a moment. "How is the little one? The ears, any better?" Imani's hand stilled on the glass. "The doctor says she needs an operation." "Her right ear. Something with the small bones inside it. They say if it is not fixed soon, she could lose the hearing for good." She wiped at a spot that was already clean. "They also told me the price. So I am not thinking about it right now. I am thinking about today." Theo was quiet. He had seen many things in 30 years in that house. He had seen money do great cruelty and, once or twice, great good. "Things have a way of turning," he said at last. "I have lived long enough to know it. Keep her close and keep your head up." Imani thanked him, because she was a woman who said thank you and meant it, and she went back to her windows. She did not know that, 2 floors above, a man was standing at his own window looking down at the gray city, feeling more alone in his great house than she had ever felt in her small one. She did not know that the cold woman with the leather book had already written her daughter's school field trip note off as a thing to be mocked, having seen it stick out of Imani's bag. She did not know that in 6 weeks she would be standing in a ballroom while 300 people watched her child shamed. She knew only that it was Tuesday, that rent was due in 9 days, and that her girl was sleeping safe across the city with a rabbit in her arms. On that morning, that was enough to keep her moving. She finished the windows. She started on the dining room. And the great house turned slowly around her, full of secrets she had not yet been let in on. Luca Moretti had learned a long time ago that a name can be a cage. His grandfather, Salvatore Moretti, had come to America with nothing in his pockets and built an empire out of brick and nerve. In those rough early years the family name had been spoken with fear, and some of that fear had been earned. By the time Luca was born, the family had moved fully into real estate, into towers and offices and clean deals signed in bright rooms. But a name like Moretti does not lose its old shadow easily. People still leaned close at parties and whispered that he was a boss of the old kind, a dangerous man, a man whose handshake you did not refuse. The truth was quieter and lonelier than the rumor. Luca ran his company by the book because his father had begged him to, on the last good day of his father's life. Every deal was lawful. Every dollar was traced. He kept 3 lawyers and an honest set of accountants, and he had spent his whole adult life trying to outrun a story other people would not stop telling about him. The rumor was useful in one way. It kept people at a distance. And distance, Luca had decided, was safer than the alternative. People who got close to him already usually wanted something. That was how he had ended up engaged to Vanessa Crane. It had not been love. He could admit that to himself in the honest hours of the night. Vanessa came from an old Chicago family with a famous name and empty bank accounts, and the match made sense on paper. She was beautiful in photographs. She knew which fork to use and which senator to flatter. His board liked the idea of him settled. He had told himself that warmth was a thing other men needed and that he could do without it. He had believed that right up until the morning he saw a child laughing in his garden. It was early. He had come down for coffee before the staff expected him, and through the tall kitchen window he saw a little girl spinning on the grass with her arms out wide. A housekeeper stood nearby with a basket of cut flowers, watching the child with a look on her face that Luca did not have a word for, a look of love so plain and complete that it stopped him in the doorway. The girl ran to the woman and said something, and the woman knelt and fixed one of the small braids in the child's hair, and the child laughed again. There was no money in that picture. There was no power in it. And yet it was the richest thing Luca had seen in years. "That is Imani," Theo said behind him. Luca had not heard the old man come in. "She keeps the house. The girl is her daughter, Zuri. School is closed today, so she had to bring her along. I told her it was fine. I hope I was not wrong." "You were not wrong," Luca said, still watching. "Let the child play." He did not know why those 4 words felt important. He only knew that something in his chest, a thing he had kept locked for a long time, turned over once like a sleeper waking. Over the next days he found himself noticing them. The way Imani always said thank you, even for small things, even to people who did not say it back. The way she packed the same simple lunch and gave the larger half to her daughter. The way Zuri tilted her head when someone spoke to her from the right side, leaning in to catch the words, and how her mother had taught her to do it without shame. He noticed, too, how Vanessa treated them. He saw her hand Imani a dish to wash again for no reason. He saw her tap that little leather book. He heard her call the staff, the help, in a voice meant to remind them they were less. One evening Luca passed the kitchen and heard Vanessa's voice low and sharp. "I do not want that woman's child in this house again. It looks poor. We have a gala coming. People will be here. Make sure of it." Luca stood in the hallway and said nothing, and he was ashamed of his silence even as he kept it. He had spent his whole life letting a name speak for him and saying little himself. He told himself it was not his business. He was wrong, and the gala that Vanessa was planning would teach him how wrong, in front of 300 witnesses. But that was still weeks away. For now he only knew that a small girl had spun in his garden, and that for the first time in a long time, his great house had felt for one moment like a home. The engagement gala was meant to be the largest party the Moretti estate had seen in 20 years. Vanessa threw herself into it the way some people throw themselves into war. There were florists and decorators and a man flown in from New York just to choose the right shade of white for the table linens. There were tastings and fittings and long phone calls in which Vanessa's voice rose and fell like a tide. The staff worked double hours. Imani polished silver until her hands ached and her reflection looked back at her from every spoon. The invitation list was 300 names of the most important people in the city, and Vanessa guarded it like treasure. The staff, of course, were not on it. The staff would serve. The invitation that changed everything came by accident, the way many good things do. It happened in the front hall, 1 week before the gala. Zuri had come to the house again, school being out for a teacher day, and she sat quietly in a corner with a coloring book while her mother worked, just as Theo had allowed. Luca came down the stairs with a stack of papers and, not watching his feet, dropped them in a great white scatter across the floor. Zuri was up before her mother could stop her. The little girl gathered the papers carefully, tapping them straight against the marble the way she had seen grown-ups do, and held them up to the tall, frightening man with both hands. "You dropped these, mister," she said. "I put them in order. The numbers go small to big." Luca looked down at the papers. She had indeed put them in order. He looked at the small serious face and felt that locked thing in his chest turn over again. "Thank you," he said. "That was a great help." "You are welcome," Zuri said, very proud. Then she leaned her head a little to the right, the way she did, and added, "I cannot hear good on this side, so I have to turn. My mama says it is just the way I am made for now." Imani had come close, ready to apologize, ready to pull her daughter back. But Luca raised a hand, gently, and the apology was not needed. "There is a party here next week," Luca said, before he had fully decided to say it. "A big one, with lights and music. Would you like to come and see it? Just for a little while." Zuri's whole face opened like a window. She looked at her mother. Imani's first thought was no. Her second thought was the long list of reasons it was a bad idea. Her third thought, watching her daughter's face, undid the first two. "That is very kind, sir," Imani said. "We accept." "Thank you." She had been raised by a grandmother who taught her that when kindness is offered with a clean heart, you take it with thanks and you do not make the giver feel foolish for giving. So she took it, and she meant the thanks. Luca nodded and went on his way, and he did not see the storm he had set loose. But Vanessa heard of it within the hour, and her face went white and then red. She did not dare cross Luca openly. Instead she smiled a thin smile and said only, "How charming," and she opened her little leather book and wrote something down. That night, in the small apartment across the city, Imani sat at her kitchen table under a single lamp and made a dress. She had no money for a store dress, so she did what her grandmother had taught her. She bought 2 yards of bright coral fabric from the discount bin, the color of a sunrise, the color of joy, and she cut and pinned and sewed by hand long into the night. Zuri slept in the next room with her rabbit. Imani's eyes burned and her fingers grew sore, but she kept on, because she wanted her daughter to walk into that great house in something made with love, and she could not buy love, but she could sew it. When it was done near 2 in the morning, she held the little coral dress up to the lamp and turned it in the light. It was not perfect. The hem wavered a little. But it was bright and clean and it was made by hands that adored the child who would wear it. "You will be the most beautiful girl there," Imani whispered to the empty room. "Cheap or not, you will shine." She did not know how soon and how cruelly those very words would be tested. She only knew she had done her best, and she folded the dress with care and laid it where her daughter would see it first thing in the morning. The night of the gala, the Moretti estate burned with light. Cars came up the hill in a long bright river. Women in gowns and men in dark suits climbed the front steps under 100 lamps. Inside, the ballroom glittered. Music drifted over a sea of conversation. Waiters moved like dancers with their silver trays. And in the middle of it all stood Vanessa Crane in deep red, the queen of the night, smiling for cameras, her hand resting on Luca's arm. Imani had brought Zuri in through a side door, dressed in a coral dress, her braids fresh and beaded. The plan was simple. They would stay near the edge, watch the lights for half an hour, and slip away before anyone minded. Zuri's eyes were as wide as plates. She had never seen anything so grand in her life. "It is like a castle, Mama," she whispered, head tilted to catch her own voice. "We are in a castle." For a little while it was perfect. Theo found them near the wall and gave Zuri a small cup of punch and winked at her. Imani let herself, just for a moment, feel like part of something bright. Then Vanessa saw them. She had been waiting, in truth. She crossed the floor with her smile already sharpened, and she stopped a few feet from the little girl in the coral dress, and she raised her voice so the nearest 50 people would hear, and then 100, and then the whole room as the music seemed to fall away. "Look at her," Vanessa said. "Look at her cheap little clothes. Did someone let the help bring a child to my engagement party? Did they think no one would notice?" The laughter started, that cold nervous laughter. Zuri did not understand the words but she understood the faces. Her chin began to shake. She looked up at her mother with eyes filling fast. Imani moved at once, but the room was crowded, and 300 bodies stood between a mother and her child. It was then that Luca Moretti stepped out of the crowd. He crossed the floor. Vanessa's smile bloomed, certain he had come to stand beside her, to laugh along, to put the help in their place. But he walked past her as if she were a coat rack, and he knelt down in front of the small girl in the coral dress, bringing his face level with hers. The room stopped breathing. "Do you know what I see?" Luca said, gently, and he said it to the right side, leaning in so she could hear him clear. "I see the best dressed person in this whole room." Zuri blinked at him through her tears. "Everyone here bought their clothes," Luca went on, loud enough now that the silence carried every word to every corner. "They handed someone money and took a bag. But your dress, this dress, was made for you. By hands that love you. There is not a gown in this room worth a tenth of that. And anyone who cannot see it does not understand the first thing about value." He looked up then, just once, straight at Vanessa, and his voice did not rise, which somehow made it worse. "I would think very hard about what kind of person mocks a child to feel tall. You could have heard a pin fall on the marble." Then Luca did the thing that the whole city would talk about for weeks. He stood, took the little girl's hand in his, turned to the orchestra, and said, "Play something." And when the music started, the most feared man in Chicago danced one slow careful dance in the middle of the ballroom with a maid's daughter in a homemade coral dress, while 300 of the most powerful people in the state watched, and not one of them dared to laugh again. When the dance ended, Zuri was beaming. The room, slowly, began to clap. Not for Vanessa. For the child. Imani stood at the edge of all of it with both hands pressed to her mouth and tears running freely down her face. Vanessa had gone the color of paper. She turned and pushed her way out of the ballroom without a word. And before I tell you what came after, let me ask you this, and I want a real answer in the comments. How many children get laughed at and have no one, not a single soul, step out of the crowd for them? How many of us have stood in our own silent rooms and wished someone would? If you believe every child deserves one person willing to cross the floor, then comment the word "dance" below, and subscribe so you never miss a story where the right thing actually wins. Because what happens next is where this story truly turns. Later that night, when the cars had gone and the lights were low, Luca found Imani in the empty kitchen, drying the last of the cups with shaking hands. "I am sorry," he said. "For what was done to your daughter in my house." Imani looked at him. "You did not do it. You undid it. I will not forget that." She did not refuse the moment with false pride. She let it land, and she let him see what it meant. "Thank you, Mr. Moretti. From the bottom of my heart." He nodded, and for a long moment neither of them moved, two people from worlds that were never meant to meet, standing in a quiet kitchen at the end of a long night. After the gala, the great house felt different, the way a room feels different after a window has been thrown open. Luca did not announce any change. He was not a man of speeches. But he began to come down for his coffee when the staff were still about, and he began to say good morning, and he began to ask Theo small questions about the people who worked under his roof, people he had passed for years without truly seeing. It was Theo who told him the rest, one quiet afternoon in the study. "The little one," Theo said. "Zuri. She has trouble with her right ear. The doctors say there are small bones inside that are not formed right, and that an operation could fix it. If it is done soon. If it is not, the child may lose the hearing on that side for good." Luca set down his pen. "And the mother? Imani. Can she pay for it?" Theo gave him a long, even look, the look of a man who had known him since he was a boy. "She makes a housekeeper's wage and raises a child alone in a 2-room apartment across the city. What do you think?" Luca thought of the small serious face that had put his papers in order. He thought of the head tilted to the right to catch the words. He thought of a homemade coral dress and a slow dance and 300 people clapping for a child who had been told she was nothing. Find out the name of the best surgeon for this, he said. Find out the cost. All of it. The operation, the hospital, the care after. And do it quietly. I do not want it to be a show. I do not want her to feel small. It took 3 days to arrange. The best pediatric ear surgeon in the city was a woman named Dr. Carol Reed, and her schedule was full for months, but a phone call from Moretti Holdings opened a door, and a date was set. The hard part, Luca knew, was the telling. A proud woman might refuse charity. He did not want to wound the very pride he admired. So he did not have a lawyer call. He did not send a letter. He waited until the house was quiet and he found Imani alone, and he told her himself, plainly. There is a surgeon, he said. Dr. Reed. She is the best there is for what Zuri needs. There is an opening in her schedule in 2 weeks. The cost is handled. All of it. I want you to take it. Imani sat down slowly in a kitchen chair, because her legs would not hold her. For a moment the old fear rose, the fear that there would be a price, that nothing in this world is free, that a man like Luca Moretti would want something for it. She looked at his face and saw no price there. She saw only a man who had crossed a floor for her daughter once and was crossing it again. Her grandmother's voice came to her then, the voice of Pearl Carter, gone now 11 years but never silent in Imani's heart. When grace is offered with a clean heart, child, you take it and you say thank you, and you let it be a blessing for both of you. Pride that turns away a true gift is just fear wearing a fine coat. Yes, Imani said. Her voice broke on the word and she let it. Yes. Thank you. I accept. I do not have the words for what this means, so I will just say thank you, and I will spend my whole life being the kind of person who passes it on. That, Luca said quietly, is the only payment I would ever want. He left her there in the kitchen with both hands over her face, weeping the way you weep when a weight you have carried for years is lifted off you all at once. And somewhere above them, in the cold elegant room she had taken as her own, Vanessa Crane was watching the staff gossip about the surgeon and the operation, and she was beginning to understand that she was losing something she had never truly owned. Vanessa had not gone away after the gala. She had grown quiet, and quiet, in Vanessa, was the most dangerous thing of all. She still wore his ring. She still ran his house. And she had a leather book full of small notes, and a need to make sure that no maid and no maid's daughter ever took from her the life she had decided was hers. The Moretti family had always given money away. It was the one part of the old name that Salvatore Moretti had built clean from the start. The Moretti Foundation gave to schools, to hospitals, and most of all to families newly come to America with nothing, the way Salvatore himself had once arrived. Every year it gave away millions. Luca chaired it, but the daily work had, 3 months earlier, been handed to Vanessa, who had asked for it sweetly and called it a way to do good as the future Mrs. Moretti. It was Theo who first felt that something was wrong. Theo had no head for high finance, but he had 30 years of watching how money moved through that house, and he had a feeling, the kind older people learn to trust. He had seen the foundations giving slow without reason. Schools that used to get help wrote to ask why the checks had stopped. A shelter for new families sent a polite letter that went unanswered. And yet the foundation spending, on paper, was higher than ever. Something does not sit right, Theo told Luca one evening. The money is going out the door. But it is not landing where it used to land. I cannot prove it. I just know the look of a thing that is off. Luca did not wave it away. He had learned, lately, to listen. Then we will prove it or clear it, he said. Lawfully. Quietly. We will hire someone who counts for a living. The someone was Daniel Bennett, a forensic accountant with a careful manner and a reputation for finding what people hid in plain sight. Luca gave him full access to every foundation record and one instruction. Follow the money. All of it. Wherever it goes. And bring me only what you can prove on paper. Daniel Bennett worked for 2 weeks in a small office at the foundation, head down over ledgers and bank records and the long boring trails that money leaves when it thinks no one is looking. He spoke to no one. He drank a great deal of coffee. And slowly, one number at a time, a picture formed. The money was leaving the foundation through a set of companies that did good work on paper and did nothing at all in the real world. They had names like Bright Future Services and Open Door Outreach. They build the foundation for programs that were never run, for families that were never helped, for buildings that did not exist. And the bank accounts behind those empty companies, when Daniel followed them all the way down, led to one name. He did not say the name out loud. He wrote it in his report, and he wrote it carefully, with every dollar traced and every date marked, because a thing you cannot prove is just a rumor, and Daniel Bennett did not deal in rumors. He brought the report to Luca on a gray afternoon and laid it on the desk. "You asked me to follow the money," Daniel said. "I followed it. It is all here, every step, and it will stand up anywhere it needs to stand up. But I want you to be ready, because you are not going to like where it lands." Luca opened the report. He read it slowly. He read it twice. And his face, which had spent years giving away nothing, went very still. The companies were Vanessa's. The empty programs were Vanessa's. The money meant for new families and schoolchildren, for shelters and the kind of struggling mothers his grandmother's hands had once helped, had been flowing for 3 months into the private accounts of the woman who wore his ring. He thought of the foundation his grandfather had built clean. He thought of the families it was meant to serve, families just like Imani and Zuri, families with homemade dresses and impossible bills. He thought of a woman in deep red mocking a child for being poor while quietly stealing the very money meant to lift such children up. "Thank you," Luca said to Daniel, and his voice was quiet and even. "You have done exactly what I asked. Tell no one yet. I want this done right. By the book. In the open. The way my grandfather would have wanted." He closed the report. "There will be a board meeting. And there will be nothing for anyone to whisper about, because every word of it will be true and written down." Daniel nodded, gathered his coat, and left the way careful men leave, having done his work and ready to do it again before a board if asked. Luca sat alone in the study for a long time as the gray light faded, holding a report full of numbers that had broken open his whole life, and feeling, strangely, not anger first but a deep and settling clarity. He knew now what kind of person Vanessa was. He had known for weeks, in his chest, the way Theo knew. Now he knew it on paper. And he knew what kind of person he wanted in his life instead. He had known that since a little girl handed him a stack of papers in the right order and a woman in green said thank you and meant it. The morning of Zuri's operation, the sky over the city was a clean pale blue. Imani had not slept. She sat in the hospital waiting room in a royal blue dress, her hands folded so tight her knuckles ached, watching the doors that her daughter had been wheeled through an hour before. Zuri had been brave. She had held her rabbit and waved and said, "I will hear you better after, Mama," on both sides, and then the doors had swung shut and taken her away, and Imani had been alone with the longest hours of her life. Except she was not alone. Luca Moretti came through the waiting room doors at 7 in the morning with 2 cups of coffee, and he handed her one, and he sat down in the hard plastic chair beside her, and he stayed. "You did not have to come," Imani said. "I know," he said. "I wanted to." So they waited together. At first they did not speak much. Then, because waiting is long and silence is heavy, they began to talk, the way people talk when worry strips away all the polite walls. He told her about his grandfather, who had come to this country with nothing and slept in doorways and was saved, the story went, by a stranger's kindness in his lowest hour, though the family had lost the details over the years. He told her about his father, who had begged him on his deathbed to keep the name clean. He told her, haltingly, that he had been lonely for longer than he cared to admit, that a great house can be the emptiest place in the world. Imani told him about Pearl, the grandmother who raised her, who had nursed 6 strangers in her own home and given away food she could not spare and taught a small girl that kindness is the only wealth that grows when you give it away. She told him about the night sewing dresses, the buses, the long math of being poor. She did not tell it for pity. She told it the way you hand someone a true thing, because they have handed you one first. And somewhere in those long hours, between cold coffee and held breath, two people who had grown used to being alone stopped being alone. You are not what they say you are, Imani said softly, watching the doors. The things people whisper about you. The boss. The dangerous man. I have worked in your house for 8 months. I have seen the truth of you. You are the kindest man I have known since my grandfather passed. Luca was quiet for a moment. Most people only see the name, he said. You are the first person in a long time who saw past it. You and your daughter both. It was past noon when Dr. Carol Reed came through the doors in her surgical scrubs, pulling down her mask, and Imani was on her feet before the doctor took a second step. The operation went beautifully, Dr. Reed said, and she smiled, and it was the smile every parent prays for. We repaired the bones in her ear. She came through it strong. She is waking up now, and she is asking for her rabbit. And she is asking for her mama. The doctor paused. She will hear, Miss Carter. On both sides. For the rest of her life. Imani's knees buckled, and Luca caught her elbow and held her up, and she turned and pressed her face into his shoulder and wept, and he held her, and neither of them thought it strange, because somewhere in the long hours of that morning the distance between them had quietly closed. When Imani went in to see her daughter, Zuri was small in the big white bed with a bandage over her ear, blinking up at the lights. She turned her head and saw her mother, and then she saw the tall man behind her, and she smiled. Mama, Zuri said. I can hear the clock. There is a clock on the wall and I can hear it ticking on this side. I never heard a clock on this side before. She said it as if she had been handed the moon. Luca had to turn and look out the window for a moment, because a man with a feared name does not like to be seen with wet eyes, and a small girl hearing a clock for the first time had undone him completely. That evening, walking out of the hospital into the cool blue dusk, Imani stopped at the door and turned to him. Whatever happens, she said, I want you to know that you gave my daughter the world today. There is no thank you big enough. So I will just try to be worthy of it. You already are, Luca said. You have been the whole time. I was just slow to see it. He did not tell her, that night, about the report sitting in his study, about the numbers that would soon end his engagement and shake his whole house. He wanted her to have this one clean day. But it was coming, and it was coming fast, because Vanessa Crane had noticed Daniel Bennett in the foundation office, and she had begun to understand that the books had been opened, and a cornered Vanessa was about to make her last and most desperate move. Vanessa moved first, because frightened people often do. 2 days after the surgery, she went to Luca with tears that did not reach her eyes and a story already half built. She told him the housekeeper had been stealing. She had proof, she said, small things gone missing, and was it not strange that the woman had grown so close to the master of the house? She tapped her little leather book. She had made notes. She suggested, gently, that Imani be fired before she could do more harm, and that the whole sad business be kept quiet for the family's good name. Luca listened to all of it without a word. When she was done, he set a folder on the table between them. It was Daniel Bennett's report. Before you say anything more about stealing, Luca said, you should know that the foundation has been audited. He watched the color leave her face the way it had left it at the gala, only this time there was no crowd, no music, no child to mock. There was only the truth, traced and dated and impossible to argue with. I am not going to shout, Luca said. My grandfather built that foundation clean, and we are going to keep it clean, which means we do this properly. There will be a board meeting. The auditor will present what he found. The board will vote. And then it will go where such things go, to the people whose job it is to handle them under the law. Not to a back room. Not to a whisper. Into the open, where it belongs. Vanessa tried, then, every door she had. She begged. She raged. She turned cold and threatened his name, his standing, what people would say. Luca did not move. People have whispered about my name my whole life, he said quietly. I have spent 34 years proving I am better than the rumor. You stole from children and from struggling families and from new arrivals with nothing, the very people my grandfather swore to lift up, and you did it while wearing my ring. There is no version of this where you keep that ring. It is over, Vanessa. Lawfully and completely over. The board met 3 days later in a bright room high above the city. Mr. Whitman, the old chairman, called it to order. Daniel Bennett stood and presented his findings, calmly and clearly, every dollar traced from the foundation through the empty companies and into Vanessa's private accounts. He answered every question. He left no room for doubt, because he had spent 2 weeks making sure there would be none. When he finished, the room was silent. Then Mr. Whitman called the vote. The board voted, every hand, to remove Vanessa Crane from any role in the Moretti Foundation, to recover every stolen dollar through the courts, and to turn the full report over to the authorities. It was done in the open, on the record, the way clean things are done. Vanessa left the building that day with her famous name and nothing else, and the matter passed out of Luca's hands and into the hands of the law, where it would run its proper course without a single weapon raised or a single threat made, only paper and truth and the slow sure weight of doing things right. That night, Luca could not sleep. He had ended an engagement, exposed a thief, and protected a foundation his grandfather had bled to build. He should have felt only relief. Instead he felt the strange pull he often felt when he thought of his grandfather, a sense of a story half told. He had never known the details of how Salvatore had survived those first terrible years. The family always said only that a stranger had saved him, that he had been sick and starving and a kind hand had pulled him back from the edge, and that he had searched for that person for the rest of his life and never found them. Restless, Luca went up to the attic, to the old trunks no one had opened in years, looking for he did not know what. And there, at the bottom of a cedar chest, wrapped in cloth gone soft with age, he found his grandfather's journal. He sat down on the dusty floor and opened it, and he began to read, and what he read on those yellowed pages stopped his heart. Because the stranger who had saved Salvatore Moretti, the kind hand in his lowest hour, the person his grandfather had searched for all his life and never found, had a name. Salvatore had written it on the page in careful, grateful ink. Her name was Pearl Carter. Luca read the journal 3 times before he let himself believe it. The pages told a story the family had lost. 60 years before, a young man named Salvatore Moretti, newly off the boat with not a coin to his name, had collapsed from fever and hunger on a cold street on the south side of the city. People had stepped over him, the way crowds step over the fallen. All but one. A young black woman named Pearl Carter had found him in the gutter and, instead of passing by, had brought him into her own small home. She had no money to spare and a hard life of her own, but she nursed a stranger for 3 weeks. She fed him broth. She brought down his fever with cool cloths through long nights. She asked for nothing. And when he was well enough to stand, she gave him her last few dollars and her grandmother's brass locket for luck, and she sent him out into the world with the only words he ever credited for the man he became. Salvatore had written her words on the page. Pass it on, she told me. I do not need paying back. Just be the hand for someone else someday. That is how kindness stays alive in the world. Salvatore had built his whole fortune trying to be worthy of those 3 weeks. He had searched for Pearl Carter for 40 years, but the city was vast and records were thin and she had moved away, and he had died still looking, with her brass locket in his pocket every day of his life. Luca found the locket in the journal's folds, wrapped in the same soft cloth. He held it in his palm, 60 years old and worn smooth, and he understood that the wheel of the whole world had just turned in his hands. He went to Imani the next morning. She was in the kitchen in an emerald dress, and Zuri sat at the table swinging her legs, the bandage gone from her ear now, humming a song to herself and stopping now and then just to listen to the small sounds of the house she had never been able to hear. Luca set the open journal on the table. He set the brass locket beside it. "I need you to read something," he said. His voice was not quite steady. "And I need to ask you about your grandmother." "About Pearl." Imani read. Her hand went to her mouth. Tears stood in her eyes and then spilled, because she knew the locket. She had seen it in an old photograph of her grandmother, the one that sat on the shelf above the television in the apartment, the one Pearl said she had given away long ago to a young man she pulled out of the gutter, a story the family had heard 100 times and half believed and never thought to chase. "She told us about him," Imani whispered. "A sick boy she saved when she was young. She always said she never knew what became of him. She hoped he had done well. She hoped he had passed it on." She looked up at Luca, the truth breaking over her face like dawn. "It was your grandfather. My grandmother saved your grandfather. 60 years ago. She gave him everything he had," Luca said softly. "And he spent his life trying to find her to say thank you, and he never could. And then, 60 years later, with no one planning it, with no one knowing, her granddaughter walked into his grandson's house. And his grandson crossed a ballroom for her daughter. He shook his head slowly. Pearl told him to pass it on. And we did. Without knowing. We were passing it back and forth across 60 years and we never knew." Zuri tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mama, why are you crying? Is it a happy cry?" Imani pulled her daughter close. "It is the happiest cry there is, baby," she said. "It is the kindness coming home." What followed, in the months and years after, was the part of the story that everyone in the city would come to know, the part that turned the feared name of Moretti into a different kind of legend. Luca did not let the story stay a secret. He stood before the press and the board and told it whole, the journal, the locket, the woman named Pearl Carter who had saved his grandfather with nothing but a kind heart, and the granddaughter who had quietly cleaned his floors for 8 months. He renamed the Moretti Foundation the Pearl Carter Foundation, and he poured into it everything Vanessa had stolen and far more, and it grew to help thousands of families just like the one Pearl had once been, families with homemade dresses and impossible bills and more love than money. He and Imani married the next spring, in a garden full of bright flowers under a clean blue sky. Imani wore coral, the color of the dress that had started everything. Zuri carried the brass locket on a ribbon and stood as the proudest girl in the world, hearing every word of the vows on both sides. Theo Banks gave Imani away, walking her down the path with silver in his hair and tears on his cheeks, honored as the family he had always been. Dr. Reed came as a guest. Even Daniel Bennett came, and danced once, badly, and laughed about it. Vanessa's case ran its course in the courts and ended the way such things end, lawfully, quietly, every stolen dollar accounted for. She was never again a part of their lives, and they did not waste their happiness thinking of her. Years later, on a warm evening, an older Imani would sit on the porch of the house on the hill, Luca's hand in hers, and watch a grown Zuri play with children of her own in the garden, and the brass locket would catch the light around her granddaughter's neck. And Imani would think of Pearl, who pulled a stranger from a gutter and asked only that the kindness be passed on, and she would smile, because it had been passed on, again and again, across 60 years and 2 families and 1 ballroom floor, and it was still passing on, and it always would. That is how kindness stays alive in the world. The end.